Hey everybody, welcome to the In All Things podcast. It's time to see God in everything. All right, welcome to episode 3 of the In All Things podcast. As always, my name is Mitch Frost. How's it going, Steve?
It's going great. My name is Steve Markle.
It is?
It is, yeah, just in case.
I didn't know.
You looked at me like you weren't sure.
Well, this is episode 3. This has been fun so far, and Absolutely. I just want to say thank you to everybody who's been listening and sharing this and leaving us comments about even things that they want to hear in the future. We've already gotten a list of topics and questions for that, which is so cool. But we're kind of building this little In All Things family, and it's only episode 3, so it's really, really exciting.
Yeah, we are super excited about that. Some of the comments have been super encouraging to us, so we want to hear more from you, and we want to talk about things that you guys really care about, so we're excited. Yeah.
So it is currently 10:04 right now. What's your morning routine, Steve? How do you start your days off?
My morning routine. So right now I'm getting up at like 6 a.m. And it's not the same every single morning, but my son is in junior high and they get the bus the earliest. So my wife and I both get up and usually see him before he has breakfast, make sure he gets something good to eat. And I usually go to my desk, answer a few emails, and then when he leaves at 6:45, some mornings I go downstairs to my gym and I work out. I wish I did it every morning. I have, like most people, some types of routines that I get on a real roll with, and then sometimes not so much. And then usually by the end of that, around 7:30-ish, I'll have a little Bible reading time, get a shower, get to the office by 8:30.
All right.
How about you?
There you go. So I've been adapting and changing my morning routine. And if you know anything about me, I don't feel very adult in a lot of the things that I do, but my morning routine as of late has made me feel more adult. So like the first year that you worked with me, that I was on staff, you know that I would get out of bed, no joke, at 8:42 and be here by 9. And so that was I did that all through high school, through college. Well, with college it was different because I had to drive 40 minutes to get to school, so I couldn't really do that. But I was a very last second get up and then go person. And then I got married, and my wife is a very morning person. She likes to get up and get at it. And so I kind of followed along, and I was like, okay, I can get up a little bit earlier. And so I started getting into the routine of like 7:30, getting up, spending about 45 minutes doing a quiet time, devotional reading, and then going to work. And so as of this week, I've adapted it again.
Okay.
And so I've been getting up at 6:30, quiet time, going to the gym, then coming back, showering, and getting ready. And it's like I've been up for like 3 hours before I even get to work. So it's kind of like changing my whole perspective on what the morning can be. So I wanted to hear your feedback on.
You feel a little bit more productive, don't you?
Definitely.
I mean, I would say you have seemed more awake when you get here in the morning. There's a few times I remember last year when I could see it in your eyes that you had just rolled out. So I'm proud of you.
Thank you. Yeah, I know. I'm 22 now, so
I don't think I was getting up that early when I was 22.
Yeah.
No.
But I like it. It's been good this week. I will say, like, I get to the middle of the afternoon and I'm starting to feel a little bit of like that. I'm not a big caffeine person. I know that you are. You're big into coffee and things like that. I don't drink a lot of caffeine unless I absolutely need it, like Extreme Week and camp and things like that. Besides that, I don't drink caffeine at all. But a few times this week, I've been like, okay, now I understand the draw of caffeine.
And I bet you're going to sleep really easily, right?
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
Yep. Falling asleep in the middle of TV episodes and things like that.
Like an old man.
Like an old man.
Yes,
so,
like
hey, of all my whole life, if that's the one thing that makes me an adult, I'll take it. I like it. Anyway, so this week, we've had some interesting things that started off our week on Monday. Your son goes to Lakeview, right? Which
Correct.
is, if you don't know, that's connected to the high school that's right behind our church.
Yes.
And it is one of the biggest high schools in the Pickerington area, which is where we're at. So on Monday morning, going into Monday afternoon, a string of bomb threats happened in our area, mostly in Canal, actually. Almost every business on Gender Road was called, and somebody threatened a bomb threat to their business. Brewdog, Walmart, Chinese restaurants, you name it, they got a call on Monday afternoon that a bomb was going to go off in their location. Okay. And then that spread into Pickerington. North was on lockdown. I'm assuming Lakeview was too for a little bit. I don't think it was as severe there, but in Canal, the schools didn't happen on Monday. They sent everybody home. So Did Nick talk to you about this at all?
It's funny because I texted him when I heard about North, and I said, "Are you hearing anything at your school?" And he didn't respond until 2:00 when he was getting on the bus, and he said, "Yeah, we heard about it, but nothing happened at Lakeview."
Yeah.
So at North, at the high school, they made everybody stay out of the school in the football stadium until they cleared the school with the police, and then they let them back in. He said, "I guess they didn't care about us." And he said, I said, "How did you know?" He said, "Well, a bunch of students don't do what they're supposed to and keep their phones out, and they're texting their parents." He said, "But I had mine away." I said, "Okay, cool." But he didn't seem too concerned about it. And we talked about it. And, the whole idea of calling in a bomb threat, it's kind of like, okay, so if you really want to hurt people and kill people, you probably don't tell them that there's a bomb that's about to go off.
Yep.
So these are just people that want to cause chaos and mess up everybody's day and disrupt business.
And they did to some degree. So that part was successful.
I hope they find them and
so what's come out about it now is that it was somebody not in Ohio, somebody from somewhere else outside of Ohio that just wanted to look at this community and say, "Oh, let's just mess up the day." That's what the police
just
are saying
looked on the
about
map
this
and
point.
they
They're like, "Yep, Canal, Pickerington, let's
crazy.
do it." It's weird. But yeah, that's kind of been the joke. A little bit of bomb threats. That kind of joke that goes along with that is, if I wanted to plant a bomb somewhere, why would I warn them and give them time to get out? It doesn't make sense.
Makes no sense.
I would want the most amount of people there as possible.
Exactly.
Right?
That's your point, right? But this happened though when you were in high school there, right?
Yeah, actually, it happened often, which is really sad to say. But there's a few times that I remember pretty vividly. One of them was a student went into one of the bathrooms at North, men's bathroom, and they found a piece of paper in a stall that was, today is the day that I bomb the school, or I believe that's what it was. And because that was like not an upfront bomb threat, it was more of like, if this was real, somebody was just kind of like writing out their thoughts or something like that. So it scared a lot of people. And we evacuated right away and the school kind of got shut down. I drove at that point, so they kind of let us just get in our car and go, which was, I guess, better because I just went home and then just kind of witnessed the rest through people who were stuck there. The other one I remember really vividly, this was a big one. There was smoke and different gases coming out of a locker. Right. And so what happened that morning was they evacuated the school immediately. It became very real for a moment. Everybody ran to Lakeview, the junior high in the backyard. We were all in their gym as juniors, seniors in high school was my class. We all ran across muddy fields. We were running to this school. We were cowered down in their gymnasium. People were running to the church, banging on the windows. Like, it was that for a couple moments that morning, it was like, oh my gosh, like, of all the threats I've had in high school, this one's real. And come to find out that somebody's old science project had been left in their locker and malfunctioned, or a battery, I don't know what it was, but that was causing the smoke and the steam to come out of the vents of the locker, which made them think that it was a bomb.
Yeah, I remember I wasn't here at that time in the morning yet, but I remember somebody on staff was here, and we let in about 100 students. They were just hanging out in our foyer, and then they were calling their parents and having them pick them up. I remember the most frustrating thing for you that day was, didn't you just get a brand new pair of white Vans?
Oh my gosh, I forgot about this. Yeah, so I had a literally brand new pair of white Vans, and if you know me at all, I really like white shoes and I like keeping them clean. And they kind of pushed us and made us run through this field, and it had rained all night and all morning, and I stepped in so many puddles and the shoes were ruined completely. I actually had to throw them away, like we couldn't clean them. Yeah. Oh man, I guess that gives you some perspective of a real bomb threat, a real quotes bomb threat. And my biggest concern was my white Vans. So maybe I'm a little bit too privileged. I don't know. Anyway, so let's move on. This concept, though, of bomb threats, school shootings, terror, all of these things is a really real reality for students in this generation. Do you have any recollection of lockdown drills maybe, or school shooter drills, or anything like that when you were in school?
I really don't. I don't remember anything like that. I remember, though, talking to my parents and my grandmother recently about those type of things, and saying how they had drills during wars, like World War II. My grandmother talked about, I think it was, or so where they had to they had to practice getting under their desks, and they didn't have the media that we have, so they didn't know what was going on, but they were afraid of getting bombed, and they learned how to do that. But I don't recall that. We had fire drills just like anybody else. Any other school, that was always kind of a pain, but we got out of class for a while. But I don't remember anything like this, no.
So as long as I can remember in elementary and junior high and all of those things, we had these types of drills. We would have basic lockdown drills where they would turn off all the lights in the school. We'd have to lock the door and then sit against the wall to where if anybody walked by, they couldn't see us. And we'd have to sit there for 15, 20 minutes while their staff would walk through the halls and make sure all the doors were locked and all that kind of stuff. So I remember those. And then the older that I got, kind of the more intense the drills got. So there was times where they'd have a stranger come in almost playing the role of a school shooter, and we had to immediately go into that lockdown drill and just like wait for this person to come by and stuff like that. And then it got to a place in high school where I for some reason I feel like they were called Alice drills, but I don't remember what it stood for. But we had to prepare to throw things if somebody came in. We had to grab chairs, things like that, blockade the doors, like move all our desks. Like it got very intense near the end of my high school career to where those were the drills that we had to practice because you could say it's never going to happen here, but when it does, it's good to be prepared, I guess, because it's such a reality in the world we live in.
Yeah, maybe you guys can look up what your Columbine was, because Columbine was
the first major one.
The one that started it all. I think I was a youth pastor at that time, and I was. And I remember vividly how that had repercussions for every high school, every school all across. And I remember that after that, though, there was others and there was threats. And then we had, not that long ago, Sandy Hook in elementary school. And they did. They taught the students how to hide, how to blockade a door, and teachers, what a teacher had to do. Man, you had to go through all this extra training now, what to do in case of a shooter. So, yeah.
Columbine was April 20th, 1999.
1999.
So that was right before I was born.
Yes.
But I know the stories of Columbine. Like you said, it kind of started this idea of terror at school.
Absolutely.
But it hasn't stopped, which is a really sad reality that students of this world live in. So we kind of touched on this actually in the first episode of In All Things, where we kind of said the phrase, the disappearance of childhood. And we both said, oh, that could be an interesting episode. So here we are. Let's talk a little bit more about this. With the bomb threats that have happened this week, even though maybe they're funny or just to disrupt things, this is a real conversation that we need to have. Because if you're a parent listening, or you're a student listening, or you're just somebody who's kind of looking at the world around you like, whoa, this is crazy. Let's talk about a little bit of the reality of what students are going through on a day-to-day basis. So I studied this in college, a couple different classes where we actually looked at this phenomenon called the disappearance of childhood. And it's a very real thing that's happening with this generation more than ever before. And there's a couple different factors that play into it. So I want to talk about those different factors and then just kind of go through each one and talk about the implications of that. Okay, so it's partially caused by social media. So we'll talk a little bit about that. Technology, social media, exposure of the world around them, that's definitely causing this idea of the disappearance of childhood. But also it's caused by a little bit more prevalence of crazy people and a little bit more people who are just willing to go do these horrific things. So I want to talk about both of those things, but just to kind of define it, this idea of the disappearance of childhood, what this means is essentially kids are being forced to grow up faster than they ever have. And even if it's not somebody literally forcing this on them, it's happening. Just culture and the world around them, they're, what I was exposed to in 7th grade, that's what a 4th grader is seeing now, along those lines. And so just all across the globe, especially in America though, kids are just being forced to grow up faster. Any initial thoughts on this conversation?
I 100% agree with you. You said, when did you get your first cell phone?
My parents were a little bit harder on me, so I didn't get it till the end of my freshman year, which was like shocking to the other classmates that I had.
Right. But most of them were getting it, 7th grade?
Before that.
Yeah. Now it's like 4th, 5th grade.
Yeah.
They all have phones.
Right.
And, you can put all that you want on there as a parent to try to control what they see, but it's very difficult. So I agree with you. I think as we get into this discussion, it's going to be interesting because, you just finished school last year studying to be a student pastor. That's what I did. But I went to school, like you said last week, I'm 29 years older. Thanks for the reminder.
Yep.
But I went to school for the same reason, for the same path. And one of the things that they talked about was how adolescence has expanded. It used to be like 13 to 18-year-olds was the adolescence. And they said, really, it's backed up to like 11. This was when I was in school. Starts at about 11, but now it goes to 25 or so because people don't get married as early, generally speaking, and they live with their parents longer. So they are forced to become more like adults sooner, but then they don't really become a responsible adult as early. So it's a really interesting dynamic for us to discuss.
Yeah, absolutely. Let's start with this conversation of social media and technology.
Okay.
When was the first time that you maybe had internet? When do you remember that kind of coming into the picture for you?
I can picture when we first had it. I can picture the home that we lived in. It was when I was a youth pastor. It was around the year in the late 90s, around 2000. And I remember that we had the dial-up, and so you couldn't be on the phone at the same time, and it was this noise. I can't imitate the noise, but it would be this long, irritating noise, and you dial up, and it was so slow, but that was it. So, I mean, like, it wasn't normal. And you had to pay for your minutes, so it was different at first.
And when did you have your first cell phone?
So
I know they've changed a lot.
Yeah, right. The first one was like a bag phone that we carried in our car, and it was like it was like the size of a big book.
That's crazy.
And it had a little antenna stuck on it, and you didn't use it unless it was an emergency. And so, but thank God we had it. We had a bad accident, and it was a lifesaver. But the until I got the one that you carry in your pocket, it was probably late 90s. Yeah, I think. Yeah.
Yeah. And then it kind of adapted into more of a flip phone type thing.
Yeah.
After a while.
Right. And it was all limited though. You didn't want to use your minutes. You didn't want to texting. It was that was not right away.
Yeah.
So,
and what's your first interaction that you can remember with social media of any kind? I don't know what the first big one would have been.
I think it probably was Facebook.
Yeah,
I really
probably.
don't remember anything before that.
Were you a MySpace person at all?
I remember MySpace. I didn't have my own page, but I remember it, and it was like mainly seemed like artists had it, musical artists, and some people. And I remember though, as youth pastor, when it first became a thing, there were some students that had a MySpace page, but I didn't really pay that much attention.
And then, what all do you have now? What platforms do you have now?
So Facebook, obviously, and Instagram. Those are the two main that I actually use, interact with. And then I have Twitter. I don't post. I follow a bunch of things just to keep up with news more than anything related to the sports teams that I follow and like major news outlets. That's a good way to keep track, I think, of what's going on in the world. But I mean, that's pretty much, I don't comment on Twitter. But those are the main three.
You're not a big TikTok influencer or anything like that?
No. How about you? So what about you?
Man, the first one that I had was Instagram, actually. It was I finally convinced my parents as a 8th grader, I believe, when I had Instagram at first, because all my friends had it. Lots of restrictions on it, but that's what I had first. And then I had Twitter after that. And Twitter was really different when it first started for like high school students, because we used Twitter. Like literally you would sit in study hall and refresh it and figure out what was happening in the school. Like, oh, this person just got in a fight. Or like it was a very minute by minute, second, which it still is, but it's kind of transformed more into a news outlet for a lot of people. But Instagram's always been my favorite. That's my go-to for sure. And then after that, I was very late to the game with Facebook, but I got Facebook kind of graduating high school, going into college. I was finally like, okay, I should get a Facebook. I've always had Snapchat. And then, TikTok has come into play. Vine will be my favorite social media platform outside of Instagram of all time. I love that when that was around. Right? Oh, yeah. It was taken down.
You did a lot on there, right?
Oh, just
there's videos
I don't want to talk about this.
That should never be seen, right?
They can't. I've
so
tried
to
find them
anywhere. No, okay.
We don't have to get into that. But I did have a streak of being Vine famous. But anyway, so our approaches and our kind of takes on social media and technology are even different, because we had a computer in my home. That's what I remember for a long time. And then I had an iPod, that kind of turned into, I could get social media on there and things like that. But ever since I was a 7th grader on, I remember having access to the world around me. And so this can be a problem for some people. Let's focus mainly on the topic of social media first. Is social media the devil? Because some people like to say some bold things about it. I'm sure our viewpoints on social media are very different. So I'd love to hear your take on it today, right now, the way that it's used. How do you feel about it?
I don't think it is the devil, but I think it can be used, obviously, by the devil in people's lives if we want to do that. I think that social media has a great place in our lives and can connect people in so many ways.
Yeah.
And we use it. I mean, personally, I use it, and we use it as a church because that's where people are. Yet I know there are many people within our church that do not use it at all, and they did at one point. Now they don't because they saw how much of an addiction it was for them. I think the part that makes it the devil for people in their lives, it really can be a temptation, is the comparison trap that they fall into. That's one of the biggest things I think for children, especially. We say children, just parents of childhood. I think we're talking more of the older ages of children when they're allowed to be on it. You can look at what other people are doing and feel bad about yourself. You can look at how they look and feel bad about yourself. And of course, we know there's a lot of really bad things that get shared on social media, and that's really scary. So I think there's got to be some limitations on it. If you just live on that, if you don't put time limits on it, you're going to have a struggle in your life. It can become an addiction.
And how would you describe your own personal interaction and usage of social media?
I think at times it's too much. I think I have, for me, I don't check Instagram but once a day. Twitter only if I'm gonna want to see what's going on, or I have notifications set up if something when a certain person tweets about something, so I know like it's a major news outlet. Facebook, there's so many things it's used for. The Messenger, some people communicate with me that way, so I get notifications for that. But I don't have it push notifications to me for every time somebody likes a post or anything. But I probably check that on my free time, like walking, getting up from the desk to go get a drink or go to the bathroom. I have my phone with me. I'll just check and read some stuff there. But I try not to make that a regular, like every moment, every notification I have to be aware of, because it can just be completely overtaking in your life. And I think for me, what I've done, and for most part, the things I post are either about the church and what we're doing, or like a family post, but not every detail of life, not everything I'm doing, not every day, but like major family events, those type of things.
Yeah, absolutely. For me, it's a little bit different. I'm 22, so I love social media, right? I've kind of grown up in the world of it, really. Like I said, from 7th grade on, I remember it being a very big part of my social experience and interaction with other people. When I meet new people, when I make new friends, the first thing is let me find them on social media. And I grew up in the world where we were being told in high school, hey, on your social media page, when you go get a job, people are going to look at it. People are going to look at your likes and who you follow and the things you say. And so I've kind of been raised in this world where social media, yes, is fun and it's cool, but it's also a really, really big platform for who you are as a person, right? I'm in the world, grown up in the world of a personal brand and, just like all these different types of things. And I've had seasons where the comparison trap is so detrimental, and that kind of disguises itself and comes through the platform of social media. So I've gone through that, and it's interesting. It's a really interesting world because I see so much positive things that can come out of social media. The ability to communicate to so many people so fast is huge, but obviously platforms like that can be used in ways that are really detrimental. And so I love it. I think I don't know if I could really imagine a world without it, just because I've always kind of been in it. But there's a very real side of it that is very scary and very dangerous and very real. I remember multiple different periods of time in pop culture where things would happen, and before the news even really started really talking about it, every single person was posting about these big things all throughout high school. But even in the last couple of years of, who gets elected or who's saying what in big politics, or the murder of George Floyd or COVID, or like just once something like that happens, everybody's story is talking about it. Everybody's posting about it. And before you could even get to Nick or any of your children and say, hey, this is happening, here's what we need to talk about, they've already seen it.
That's right.
And that's the world that we live in. And so now we got to bring into the conversation of what is happening. What are the byproducts of a student, a kid who lives in a world where if something explosive happens, something violent even, they're going to see it. It's not a matter really of when they see it, how they see it, where they see it. It's a matter of, okay, they're going to see it. What do we do with it? And even if they don't have social media on their phones, this is another thing that parents, even if they don't have social media on their phone and they're not directly being exposed to the things happening, people are talking about it at school. People are showing them at school. Okay. Like this is a very, very big conversation. So I don't know. I'm excited.
Yeah, I know, because even like our last podcast, we talked about 9/11. When we got home that night, we were protecting our children from watching the news because we didn't want them to see all that. Mm-hmm. Like if it happened now, they would have already seen it before they even got home.
They might have been telling you.
Right, exactly, exactly. So yeah, this is a good discussion, interesting, because I think one of the words that pops into my mind immediately is desensitization. Mm-hmm. Our kids just see so many images that they're desensitized to things that we would have been shocked by.
Yeah.
When I was a kid,
Absolutely.
never saw those things. It's scary, even in social media, you got to be careful. You were talking about job interviews and people looking at who you follow. Somebody pointed out somebody to me that I allowed to follow me on Instagram and that I followed back and had an inappropriate picture, and they thought, do you really want it? And I was like, I appreciated them letting me know. I didn't even realize that.
Right.
You got to be careful. Everybody can look at what you look at and what you follow and think that, and all kinds of inappropriate stuff out there. I was thinking, it just pops into my mind, like the images that our kids are exposed to today and how we didn't see those things. And not just social media, but all media, like I was talking about inappropriate images. They just watch a football game. If father and son watching a football game, the commercials that come on during the game, sometimes are like you just want to block out the screen, cover their eyes because they're seeing things that you would have never seen. And I was thinking, what's the most explicit thing I saw when I was a kid? I think it was like out of a Sears catalog. In the back of the catalog that you would look, I'm looking for what toys I wanted for Christmas, and there was people modeling underwear, and that would be like the most explicit thing that I was exposed to when I was a kid. Yeah. And now, there's so many things go before their eyes.
Yep.
And I think, wow, how do we deal with that? How do we protect them? How do we make them not so desensitized to it?
And I think that's kind of what we're moving into in this conversation is let's come up with a couple ways, talk about a couple things that we can do, because this is a reality. This is the world we live in, and the disappearance of childhood is very real. So since we've already kind of concluded that, what do we do? Do we hide kids from everything that happens in the world and never let them have a phone, never let them have social media, never let them see the world around them? Or do we kind of shove them in, throw them to the wolves? Hey, here's the world you live in. There's multiple different approaches to this conversation of, well, my kid can have a phone, have social media when they're 18. Okay, that's one approach, right? But or hey, my daughter is a sixth grader and she's making TikTok videos that are extremely inappropriate, right? There are so many different approaches to this conversation. And what I want to try to do in the remainder of our conversation today is let's just kind of arrive at a place where we come up with a few real things that we can do with this. And this, and a couple times parents have come up to me kind of knowing about what we're going to talk about at the well or series that we're going to do, and they've kind of asked me the question of, should we be talking about that? Like, is it okay if my 7th or 8th grader comes and talks about this? And I've kind of always held this approach with any conversation. If they're not getting it from here, they're getting it somewhere else. If they're not hearing our biblical stance on the things that are happening, real world things that are happening, even if they're inappropriate, whatever you want to call them, they are getting them from friends, peers, whoever at school. And so I think it's important for us as the church to take a stance with these things and talk about them and address them, even if they're uncomfortable and awkward to talk about. It's important for us to address them from a place of God's truth and what Jesus wants us to do and interact with them, right? If God works in all things, he works in the things that our students and kids should not be exposed to, but unfortunately they are, right? I was thinking about what it's like to be a youth pastor now and all that comes with it. One of the first scriptures that pop into my mind, I think might lay a groundwork for us, is the words of Solomon in Proverbs chapter 4, verse 23,
where he's talking to his son. He said, above all else, guard your heart, for out of it flows everything in your life. And so our objective as parents is to guard the hearts of our kids. And I know your objective as a student pastor is to help that process of guarding their hearts. And I think talking about it is important. I mean, even back when I was youth pastor 20 years ago, there was still times when I would talk about dating and sex, and parents would be like, I don't think my kids need to hear that. I'm like, yeah, okay. And I mean, and not to, feel vindicated, but, I've had times where parents have said that, and then the next year their kid's in a bad relationship and they don't think their kids are ready for that conversation. They need to hear what the Bible says about it. And I think we need to teach them that. And I think we need to be very open and honest. And I think parents that stick their head in the sand are just asking for trouble.
Right.
And I don't think we live in a world where we have that much of an option to totally withdraw our kids and keep them from everything. I wish, that was possible at some points, but really that's not realistic. And we're called to be salt and light in this world, Jesus said. So I don't think we can remove ourselves from this world. And if you go the approach of being extreme, I think extremes are dangerous. If you go the approach of being extreme with your rules as a parent and not letting them do anything, not letting them have a phone till they're 18 or have any type of social media, then it's going to be difficult for them to interact with other students. And sometimes they're going to rebel because they feel left out. And then if they rebel, sometimes things get worse. So Sherry and I, my wife and I, have always been like, we got to find the balance of being protective of them, but also letting them, be somewhat normal so that they can have friends and so they can interact and share their faith, but also how to live that faith out in a way where they are still protected.
Yeah. And I think no matter what generation we're talking about, there's always going to be those students who were super sheltered their entire lives, and then they go to college and they kind of go off the rails because it's their first taste of anything real in the world and anything exciting. So it's like, oh my gosh, let me do everything, right? And things can get really, really out of hand. So I think the conversation goes more towards where our foundation is at, right? And I think not just students and parents listening, but any Christ follower listening, our foundation has to be in a place where even if something horrible happens or I'm exposed to something that I never should have been exposed to, I know that it's not going to shake my foundation in Jesus, right? Scripture tells us that, if you hear the words of Jesus and they go in one ear and right out the other, it's like your house is built on sand. And when, I love that the Bible says when, doesn't say if, it says when the storms come and the waters rise, it's going to fall. But if you hear the words of Jesus, the teachings of the Bible, and you actually put those into practice, then when those same storms and waters and winds come, you're going to stand firm. And I think we have to be able to implement that in these students and kids' lives to where when they're exposed to these horrible things, yet again, they're going to be able to stand on a foundation that doesn't break.
Yeah, I have four kids, and 3 out of the 4 are already adults. And with each of them, the ones that are adults and the one that now is a teenager, we went through things where we kind of let some storms happen in life. We didn't control everything. We can't control everything as a parent if your kid's going to go to school and live in this world. But when those things come, being able to go back to the foundation that we have, talk about them, keeping that communication open, not be overbearing,
right?
But also, I know, and I think parents have the right to see their kids' phones. Like, it's my phone. I'm like, who's paying for that? You have the right. But we weren't overbearing with that. But they knew if we ever asked to look at it at any time, they had to let us, in case if we were suspicious. But we weren't always doing that. We had to have a little bit of trust as well. But you can't put your head in the sand either. So it's this fine balance. So I think as a parent, you need to really search for that balance. I think because I know so many that have regrets that they didn't monitor anything. They just were like, oh, my kid's great, and we go to church. I'm like, that's not the only answer. That's not all it takes. Just going to church and not monitoring, not being involved in the discussions about how they're handling what's going on. You're asking for trouble.
You are. Yeah. No, I think that's great. I think there's an extremely, extremely important conversation and element of this conversation of balance, just finding the balance between knowing that you're not going to keep your kid completely shielded from everything because it's impossible. And at the same time, setting them up for success for when those things happen, it's not going to fall apart, right?
Right.
And this conversation goes into really the disappearance disappearance of childhood conversation as a whole, to where we could include social media, terror in schools, all of these different type of things that students face on a day-to-day basis. I think it all goes back to that place of balance. It all goes back to that place of foundation, right?
Right.
And so this is maybe uncomfortable of a conversation, but let's go there. In this same world of disappearance of childhood comes the conversation of pornography. And I know you and me have talked a little bit about just how sad it is that we live in a world where, a kid can open their phone and literally built into Apple's software can go on Safari, click private, right? Private browsing mode. And their history will never show it. It'll never look like they ever went to those websites. And all it takes is a search on Google to find anything that they want. And for me personally, I remember, this is me being very vulnerable about the world that I lived in. I remember being a 7th grader, sitting down in the cafeteria with a group of friends that I had at that time that I didn't stick with long for different reasons. But I sat down at this table and I was talking, hanging out, eating lunch, and 2 of the guys across the table were watching something on their phones. And I was like, oh, and I had not been exposed to this at all at that time. And so I was like, oh, eating my lunch, hanging out, doing this. And suddenly they turned the phone around, they're showing everybody, and it was a pornographic video right in the middle of the cafeteria at school. And suddenly I'm like, what is this? Like, I never even knew the word porn at that point in my life, right? But in that moment, right, technology, social media, the world at the fingertips of a 7th grader, it became very dangerous. And a lot of those conversations that group of guys had is extremely demeaning and downplaying. And it came to a place where in my life where I had to say, okay, why do they make these jokes and say these things and talk about these things? Like, is this right? Like, what is this whole world that I had never been exposed to? And that conversation is uncomfortable, and it makes us like, oh, like we don't want to talk about that, but it's so real, and it's a real reality to where everything is downplayed. Oh, this little boy or girl, they're addicted to pornography. Hey, that's just life. Everybody does it. That's what you hear. Like, and especially in families who don't have a faith background. Oh, he was just boys being boys, but that cannot be the stance that we have to a conversation like this. And for you, when we've had those conversations in the past about how sad that world is for where students and kids live today, for you, it's a little bit different, right? Because I remember you telling me, like, if anybody wanted to do any of those things, and they had to go to a store, they had to rent something, they had to stand in front of somebody and pay. Like, it was a whole different world, right?
Yeah, you had to. It was, yes. I remember, I probably told you, I think the first thing I was exposed to was like when I was in 7th grade. One of my best friends in the neighborhood, he found a magazine in his dad's closet in a box, and we would hang out sometimes. He would get that magazine out, and we would look at pictures, and I can remember that, and you feel shame, but it's also something that every 7th grade boy kind of wants to see, but it's a thing that causes all kinds of other issues when you get addicted to something like that. But like you're saying, though, if you want to, like, I'm not going to go in a store and buy a magazine or rent a video. But now anybody can have it at any time on their fingertips, and looking at that stuff on your iPad or your phone or your computer, it is one of the burdens that I think we both carry because of ministering to students, not just students, let's be honest, but the disappearance of childhood. It's just something that permeates all of our culture. But I don't know. I wish I knew the answer to stopping that, because like you said, even if you put filters and there's private browsing and there's ways for them to get around it, they're smart. They're more savvy than we are.
Yep.
The older you get, the less you can figure it out. And of course they're going to act like they never see it, but you have to almost assume that they have.
Yeah. And I think it's been beautiful the last couple of years. The church has really changed their stance on this conversation of pornography. I don't know if you've noticed any of it, but it went from a place of being very shameful and don't talk about that, or it's just kind of what everybody does, so we're not going to talk about it, to this place of, hey, this is a real issue that boys and girls, women and men struggle with and are addicted to, and it's rewiring people's brains to a point of affecting their marriages, affecting just all of those types of things, affecting how they talk and think about people of the opposite sex or people that they're attracted to. Like that's happening, and that's like, it's just this complete rewiring and desensitization, like you said, of students' brains that's happening at a level that it's like, to some degree we feel helpless. Like, how do you even start?
Yeah,
right?
all of us. I mean, even adults, the images that we see, we're so used to them now. We're not even like offended.
Right. So I didn't even plan on going down that route in this episode, but I think it's extremely important to bring that into this conversation, because that is a very real part of this disappearance of childhood that we're talking about, right? That comes right into play with technology and social media. They're exposed to everything, and they can see everything if they want to, and that's just very dangerous. So
guard your heart. And I think with your students, it's like, they're not probably going to be honest completely with you, but I think have the awkward conversation and say, I know it's available to you, and it's going to hurt you. And I want to do everything I can to support you and stop it from happening in your life. Yeah. Accountability is so important. Yeah. But honest conversation.
Absolutely. I think another thing that is really important to have in this type of conversation for adults or students listening is the biblical idea of taking every thought captive, which sounds really kind of overwhelming. Like, how do I stop every single thought I have in my head and take it captive? But to some degree, Louis Giglio actually just wrote a book called Don't Give the Enemy a Seat at Your Table, which is a really, really great book looking at just battles that we fight in our mind and the thoughts that we have and how to take them captive and kind of bring them to the Lord. And he says, when you get a thought in your head, you need to ask yourself the question, is this from God? Like, is this a thought that God would want me to have? Because the hard truth and the truth that we have to address is you and me, nobody in this world can stop certain thoughts from coming into our minds, right? Would you say that's true?
I say you try to fill your mind with as much good as you can, but if you're living in this world and you're ministering to real people, you're
going to see things, hear things, and have thoughts that do not line up with the Bible. That's not the part of the conversation we're arguing. But what you do with those thoughts and what you allow those thoughts to do to your identity and how you think about other people or talk about other people, that's the conversation, right? So if I'm an 8th grader and I'm exposed to something on social media that's extremely graphic in whatever way, right? I have a decision. Okay, I saw this thought. I'm having this thought. What do I do with it? Do I, remind myself of who God is and what God wants me to do and how he wants me to think? Or do I kind of buy into this a little bit and explore it a little bit more? And we have to get to a place where we learn how to do that with every thought that we have, right? Every thought that is not leading us towards a place of being like Jesus in everything that we do. And the thing is even if nobody sees the things you're doing on your phone or in the middle of the night when nobody is looking, God does, right? God knows your heart. He knows the motives. He knows why you're doing the things that you're doing. So we can think we're fooling people, right? Like, oh, nobody's ever going to know. So it's fine if I watch this, if I look at this, if I explore this, whatever. But God knows, right? He sees your heart and he's looking in that moment and he's not saying, oh man, you are just disgusting. But he's saying, man, this, you're just missing out on the things that I have for you and the better thought life that you could have, right?
Right.
So anyway, I mean, I'm about ready to wrap this up unless there's other things that you want to add.
I know. I think, it's truly hard to be a fully devoted Christ follower and then have that going on.
Yeah.
I mean, a verse that popped in my mind, Philippians 4:8, fix your thoughts on these things. And Paul goes through a list of things that are pure and lovely and admirable and
worthy of praise.
Yeah, worthy of praise. You feel better, and you just feel better about yourself when you're thinking about the things God wants you to think about. Mm-hmm. I remember a pastor saying about that whole idea of the thoughts, you can't help them from coming to your mind, but you don't need to let them, like they're flying in to your mind, but don't let them land in your life. Just let them keep on flying by. Yeah. And then just train your mind to think, where am I going to go to? When that thought comes, I got to go somewhere else in my mind and go there. Something else that gets your mind a different place.
Which comes from spending time in the Word and training your mind to think those things that are worthy of praise and all of the lists that Paul includes, right? It's a process. It's not like I'm just going to pray a prayer and now every thought I have is perfect. No, it's working through that and coming up with a way to filter your thoughts. One of my favorite pastors said, he kind of said the difference between somebody whose religion is kind of like to-do list and very, God, if I mess up, God's going to strike me dead, whatever. And somebody who has a personal relationship with Jesus. And he said, somebody who messes up on the side of, kind of being scared of God, when they mess up, they're like, oh my gosh, my father's going to kill me. But somebody who has a personal relationship with Jesus says, oh, I messed up. Let me go tell dad. Right? It's kind of this difference of we are going to mess up. We are going to be exposed by things. We are exposed to things. We are going to be led to places that don't live up to what we should be doing. Jesus's, way of life. But at the same time, are you hiding those things from God or trying to say that those things never happened? Or are you bringing those to his feet and saying, okay, I messed up. I really, really need your help in this area. I think that's a huge difference that we kind of have to work through on our own.
Yeah, I think too, the whole idea of shame and the way it used to be, I think there was like this fear that the church had if people talked about it and admitted that they struggled in this area or another, that it would just, if we said it was okay and they could be forgiven, then they're just going to want to do it more and feel more freedom to do it. But I don't think that's true. I believe that the more that we understand the grace of God and how awesome that is and what he did for us, the more we embrace that, the more that we don't want to do things that hurt his heart. I think that's where, if your heart is right and you're really growing your relationship, yes, you're still going to mess up. There's still going to be times when you stumble and fall, but I think they can become less and less in your life the more that you emphasize the relationship and not the rules. I broke a rule. Now God doesn't like me. God doesn't love me like a dad that would kick you out of the house for doing it. No, he's going to love you no matter what. But just because he does that doesn't mean that you just want to keep doing it, keep hurting him. So
I saw another quote that said, if you think your mistakes and your sin can cause God to, kick you out, here's a reminder you're not that important, which I think is awesome. But anyway, so let's go ahead and wrap this up. If you're listening today, I think this has been a great conversation about the disappearance of childhood, what to do with that balance between exposure and standing on the word and the foundation that you have, and also what to do with your thoughts and how to take them captive and keep them in line with what God wants you to do. But this has been great. Thanks for all your wisdom here. And we'll see you next week on the In All Things podcast.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for listening to this episode of the In All Things podcast. Our challenge for you today is to send this episode to one person. Seriously, think of somebody right now that could use this conversation and send it to them. If you have any questions, feedback, or topic ideas, please send them to podcast@sycamore.org, and make sure you follow us on Instagram and Facebook at Sycamore Creek Church so that you can always see what's going on in our world. If this conversation helped you at all, make sure you share it, leave a review, and subscribe so that you don't miss out on a single episode. We love you, God loves you, and we'll see you next week on the In All Things podcast.